Hey everybody, I just wanted to thank you for tuning in to the Art of Resilience podcast. Really excited about this project, and the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War just so happened to kind of coincide with when we decided to kick this off. So part of that is a series inside of the podcast, our 20th anniversary series, where I'm interviewing other guys that served in the military, guys that I served with in the Iraq War. Really, the point of it is to tell their story, somewhat reflect on what our opinions were of the war in Iraq. I think most of us really didn't care, about the politics. It was more about the men that were fighting to the left and right of us. I know for me, all I cared about was making sure that I got everybody home safe, making sure that I made tactically sound decisions that wouldn't put us at any kind of undue risk. The more important part of the story, regardless of why we're there, is that all these men that fought over there are samples of our country. They're men that live here in the United States that were young, went to go do something they believed was noble. Quite frankly, war is traumatic. I really wanted to share their stories because most of us, to include myself, had something to figure out after we got back, after experiencing the trauma of war, being blown up and shot at, fighting for your life. The transition into civilian life is difficult, and it's hard to wrap your head around that until it happens, and then when it does happen, you're left wondering, how did this happen, and what the hell am I going to do? I just want to be normal again. I want to be okay. I want to have a happy life, just like everybody else seems to, and it takes a while to figure that out, and you'll see that in these stories. And that's really what I want to share. Is I want people to be able to relate to the men that they're listening to, and maybe recognize something in themselves, because having post-traumatic stress or depression or anything like that is not a unique experience for combat veterans. Several people have it. I mean, trauma is a normal part of life that doesn't necessarily have to result in a lifetime of suffering. And these men have been through it, suicidal, lost or failed marriages, relationships, jobs, and it's taken years to figure out how to overcome all of that. But what you'll see is that these men have not given up. They haven't quit. They continue to fight until they do figure it out and figure out how to be happy. And because at the end of the day, that's really what we all want. I think it's really incredible to see the personal courage and strength that these men have in telling their story and being vulnerable enough to share things that might be a little embarrassing. I talked to all of them before doing the interview and let them know, why I was doing this, and that made them 10 times more eager to participate and share their story, because like myself, they want to help other people too. It's just that constant servant leadership that is ingrained in them from a young age, being in the military. Their mission hasn't stopped. So I'm really excited to share this series with you guys, and I hope that if anybody is out there that watches this or listens to it on whatever podcast platform you're listening to, if it resonates with you, comment, subscribe to our show, reach out to us. Maybe you're a veteran or have an awesome story that you would like to share that would also help people. That's what this is all about. The podcast is called The Art of Resilience because it is an art. It takes a holistic approach. There's no one size fits all method to figuring out how to overcome your bullshit. It takes focusing on your health, your physical fitness, your mindset, having a good social network and somebody to talk to. And even doing something like this, telling your story, is in itself therapeutic. Learning that telling their story and sharing what they're experiencing with other people is one of the most healing things that they can do. I hope that you really enjoy hearing these guys' stories, and I'll talk to you soon.
Get it out. All right. So I'm your host, Chris Call, and welcome to the Art of Resilience podcast, where heroes and high performers come to learn how to maximize mental and physical resilience and own your purpose. So this is our first episode, and for the first episode, we're actually going to be interviewing one of our co-founders, Jim Artman. I'm going to introduce him right here, and he's going to give a brief background of himself right after this. But first off, me and Jim actually met on season 3 of the Blocks television TV show for entrepreneurs back in about a year and a half ago. We have uploaded our first video already, but this is going to be our first podcast episode for the Art of Resilience. I have a very entrepreneurial background, so that's kind of like my background of resilience and high performance, and just got to be on your A game all day long. And I started out at a real estate tech startup, and I transitioned and started my own company. It's actually the Dive Live dating app that was acquired by another dating app called Love Hut back in August of 2022. And now I have a marketing agency. It's called Click Genie, and I also sell real estate and life insurance. So I'm going to let Jim introduce himself now, and this podcast is going to be all about him. And also we're going to get into his opinion and perspective of the Iraq War and how it impacted him as an individual, and also his life experience and like what led him here today. A lot of that was due to like his experiences and struggles with things that happened with the Iraq War, and we're coming up right now on almost 20 years anniversary since the U.S. invaded Iraq. And I'll let Jim introduce himself, and we'll get into it right from here.
Thanks, Chris. So, like I said, my name is Jim Artman, and my background, I served 8 years in the Army, most of which is serving as a sniper and sniper school instructor with 2 tours in combat in Iraq. Like you said, Chris, it's been 20 years since the beginning of the Iraq War, and I read an article in the New York Times about how kids are learning about this in school, and suddenly I felt old, that the war that I fought in is in textbooks now. But I felt like it would be an interesting opportunity to just kind of reflect on that and, discuss, sort of what my thoughts were then versus now, and kind of how that impacted me. So looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, for sure. So honestly, let's go back to the very beginning. I guess what was your childhood like? And were you happy as a kid?
Growing up, my grandfather, he fought in the Korean War in the Air Force, and served on B-29 bombers. And from a pretty young age, he was sort of grooming me to go into the Air Force. Would take me to air shows in Dayton, back when they could still fly over you and break the sound barrier over the crowd. I think a C-35 crashed into the crowd, ruined that for everyone. But, so for a long time growing up, I was super excited about the prospect of being a fighter pilot. I just thought there was not much cooler than going mock Jesus in an F-18, But my uncle died when I was 14, and before he died, he saw my grandfather was always, kind of pushing me in that direction to go into the Air Force and fly. And he said, you don't have to do whatever your grandpa says, And he had this book about Army Rangers, and it was showing me, these pictures of guys jumping out of airplanes and stuff, and he just thought they were the greatest. And when he died, we were pretty close, and I just sort of decided pretty easily, pretty quickly. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go do that. I'm gonna go be an Army Ranger. So that's what I did. I enlisted with Ranger contract, went straight from infantry basic training, airborne school to Ranger indoctrination program, and ended up in 1st Ranger Battalion.
Yeah, that's awesome. So do you want to talk about how that I guess were your aspirations always, about joining the military, or did you have other goals when you were growing up as well, or was Ranger or Air Force, was that with your only like ideas that you had for, what you're gonna do basically?
Um, yeah, I mean, pretty much from a real young age, I knew that I was going to join the military. I was very interested in cooking. Still to this day, sometimes I consider, maybe opening a restaurant. I love to cook, but the restaurant industry is messy. It's a lot of work that I don't know that I really want to take on. But I do love to cook for myself, my family, and friends. Just having dinner parties and stuff like that. And since getting out, really focusing on how to do that to, optimize my nutrition, kind of adds like a whole nother level of fun for me in the kitchen. Just really fortifying meals with healthy fats and as much vitamins and minerals as I can, and knowing that I'm doing that for my family, mostly without them knowing it. Just adding lots of olive oil or spices, fresh herbs, and things I know that will benefit their health, but it also tastes awesome. It's fun for me. So I think that when I was real young, when I first joined, I remember thinking like, oh, maybe I'll open my own restaurant someday. But that's pretty much it. But I enlisted when I was 17 years old, before I started my senior year of high school. And, I remember telling the recruiter, I want to do the hardest thing that I can, and I want to kill people. That was sort of my mindset back then. It's like, I just wanted to smoke dudes and, push myself and do something really challenging. Um, but yeah, that's pretty
Yeah, so
much
you
it.
had you basically had, you had a crossroad between whether you wanted to be a chef or, Ranger Artman, and yeah, obviously you chose that Ranger route. So how many deployments did you have total?
Two total deployments. The first one I did was much shorter with 1st Ranger Battalion. The second one I did was during the big push or invade. I can't remember what they called it exactly, but they were doing 15-month deployments. So I did a 15-monther with 3-7 infantry and 3rd ID. And it was actually, so when I left Ranger Battalion and went there, I had a scroll on one shoulder, or on both shoulders. Surround sound is what they used to call it. And when I was in the office signing into the battalion, the sergeant major was there, and he saw my combat scroll and CIB, and which is a combat infantry badge. And he was like, "You have any experience as a sniper?" or working with snipers? I sort of lied and said yes because I knew that's exactly where I wanted to go. Um, so he was like, "All right, you're going to the snipers." So I went there and had to try out, and made it through tryouts. And within a few months, was sent to sniper school. Came back and ended up taking over the sniper team before deployment.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You want to talk more about that, like your experience as a sniper?
Sure. I mean, I loved it, honestly. For me, what I loved about being a sniper and working with snipers is, first and foremost, we were infantrymen. But, we had to be a very self sufficient unit. So, you know, half of us were EMT trained. We could do call for fire missions. Um, proficient at everything infantry, and so there was that. And then the other thing I liked about it was the autonomy, really. We were trusted by commanders to make our own battlefield decisions, plan our own missions. And uh, the other thing I really loved about it was I spent a lot less time in vehicles. The majority of the time, if I was outside the wire, if anybody, being civilians or bad guys knew it, then I was doing something wrong.
Yeah.
So, being able to hang out, collect battlefield intelligence, engage targets of opportunity, without anybody knowing that we were there, was a lot more attractive to me than waiting to get blown up in a convoy. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, definitely. Um, and what did you do when you first got out of the military?
So the last 3 years that I was in, I worked at sniper school as an instructor, and spent a lot of time in the woods. Sniper school, the Army Sniper School, at Fort Benning, Georgia, um, and I started getting really into mushroom hunting. you know, uh, I bought field guides and was started to teach myself, how to go out and find food and medicine. A lot of people think I'm always referring to drugs. I'm not.
Yeah, mushrooms
You'd
in
be hard
general.
pressed to find psilocybe species of mushrooms in Fort Benning, but um, so I was just so enamored by the field of mycology, and found, and it was very therapeutic for me to spend all that time in the woods. So the idea of going to school, studying science, and getting a PhD in mycology and creating field guides on mushrooms, sounded great to me. I also got really into permaculture, sustainable regenerative agriculture practice, and envisioned my life wearing some Liberty overalls, having orchards, making jams and just
Yeah.
growing mushrooms, having people come out, teach them how to do that stuff. Just sounded like a idealistic way to live my life.
I said Appalachian Grit, like that whole thing was permaculture, right? Like the
Sure,
very
yeah,
big
absolutely.
portion of it. Yeah.
Yeah, later on I ended up starting a business installing that stuff for other people. So um but so anyways, I went straight from the active duty military, from Fort Benning, into working on a degree in molecular biology and biochem at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. And um, I loved it. I was doing. Um, I sort of I started with an environmental science major, and quickly realized that, actually, I'm pretty sure I told the dean of that program that it felt more of like a familiarization in science than an actual hard study of science. Um, And so I ended up switching to molecular biology and did some epigenetics research while I was there.
Awesome. Tell me more about like your transition, I guess, from the military. Like, how did your family take it? You know, just like go into like the details like that, I guess. Like,
Right. So when I got out, I was married at the time. I had been with my ex-wife for about 10 years, and it didn't take too long before um, I really started to experience more advanced symptoms of PTSD. And I guess just being in college atmosphere, surrounded by people that I couldn't really relate to, it was probably part of that. And it wasn't too long after that where I ended up going through a divorce, and so that was pretty tough on me. Um, kind of trying to transition out of the military, be a full time college student, go through a divorce. We had a child together that was very young. She was born the year I got out. So I sort of started, spiraling after that. Went from being on the dean's list to and doing research to barely being able to make it to class. So I started drinking a lot more, um, eating a lot of LSD. um, I was struggling, and it got to the point to where it got so bad that I was suicidal. Was frequently feeling like sticking a gun in my mouth. It was awful. I was a shell of a human, and I really didn't want to move up to Ohio, which is where which is where I was raised, but there just really wasn't much there for me. I really enjoyed the South, and I was exposed to much more than what the small town of Findlay, Ohio, could offer me. Especially being somebody who was, kind of a blowhard about organic, sustainable agriculture, being surrounded by, corn and bean fields, and I don't know. It was just a much different atmosphere, and I felt very out of place being there. So I ended up moving to East Tennessee, where I had some other family, some other siblings that lived there, and kind of started to work on getting my feet back under me, being there in the mountains.
and you mentioned the PTSD. Was there like any specific things that you think like caused it? Like any specific, or just like a culmination of your experiences with what you experienced in the war and everything?
Yeah, so war is pretty terrifying. There's plenty of guys that have been through a lot worse things than myself. I think within days of being there, on my second deployment, there was a patrol base that was receiving sniper fire. And so we were called on to go investigate that. And, as I went and looked at areas where I felt like they were probably being engaged from based on my experience as a sniper, I did find some, 7.62 casings laying on the ground, some bipod marks, but it was from a machine gun. And we found ourselves caught between some fish farms. We were right up against the Euphrates River, Musaib, Iskandaria area, and so within days of arriving in country, I ended up finding myself in a firefight, and it was pretty intense. The first few months that we were there, I think that's pretty typical. Whenever a unit does a handoff to a new one, taking over an area of operation, the enemy likes to, step up their game, if you will, and uh, try to intimidate, I guess, the new unit. Uh,
Yeah.
that whole area was really littered with IEDs. So, and that's both on the road and what they would call dismount IEDs, or basically landmines. They're all over the place. Our units actually lost a couple men due to those, just walking. So um, I went through some of that stuff. Was involved in a convoy that was, where there was an IED blast, the vehicle directly in front of me, and that was pretty catastrophic. Lost some guys then. So, um, I think just all of it had me pretty rattled. I really don't like loud noises. But pretty typical of most combat veterans. The hypervigilance, for sure. I feel like every time I go out somewhere, I got to look at everybody, stuff like that. But at first it was really unclear to me how those types of things were affecting me in the way that they were. Just like I went from being a staff sergeant, teaching sniper school, being very high functioning, married with a child, and homeowner, to I could barely take care of myself.
Yeah,
Misery.
it's that transition is like it's just so difficult for so many veterans. And we're gonna see like people that we interview on here, but a lot of them have similar stories. And yeah, I mean, just keep talking about like some instances that you think may have like caused this trauma. I'm not saying like from the war. I'm saying like more like reactions that you had when you got out, that were like PTSD related.
Um, well, I'll tell you one. There was so my little brother actually joined the military, did a couple tours in Afghanistan. On his second tour, I was on the list as the person to be called from the I can't remember what they call them, the wives. Would sort of communicate what was going on with the unit on
Next of
deployment.
kin, next of kin.
Do what?
Is it next of kin or whatever?
Well, not really next to kin. I can't think of what they call it. I don't know. Anyways, he had gotten into an engagement, and I got a phone call letting me know that that had happened. He was okay. But at that time, I'd been out of the military for about a year or so, and was really, really feeling it. Just not doing great. And I had talked my little brother into joining the military. Which I was at the height of my military career, so I'm like, dude, come on, it's great. He wasn't doing much. He was in high school. I'm like, do this for a little while, you get some free college out of it. See if you like it. If not, get out, and at least you'll buy yourself some time to figure it out.
Yeah.
So when I had heard that he, in a sense, had been touched by war, where he had to experience something like that, it was pretty devastating to me, honestly, because I never wanted that for him. Um, so I carried a lot of guilt with me, and I remember going home. I had a roommate at the time when I was in college, and this movie come on. He was watching this movie with Christian Bale. I can't remember the name of it, but um, there was a scene that sort of like really triggered me, where this guy was talking about how awful deployment was for him, and I kind of started to freak out and ended up like going out in my front yard and was like having a full on panic attack, like snot coming out of my face, like just sobbing uncontrollably. Um, and it took me what seemed like a very long time to snap out of that. And I remember in that moment being angry and feeling like, I was like, I just need to go back into it. I was highly qualified to go serve in the same or similar capacity for, contract companies overseas, something like Blackwater, Triple Canopy, and make great money. you know, um, I was like, maybe I should just go do that. But, part of the reason I got out of the military was because I wanted to preserve more of the person that I feel like I am, like I feel genuinely like I'm a very kind individual. And, I don't know, just living in that lifestyle where, you're surrounded by people that salivate over the idea of smoking somebody or shooting them in the face, you do sort of, I feel like, lose a part of yourself.
Yeah, you also grew there too. I feel like, because I mean, like as you said when you were going into the military, like you literally wanted to go somewhere where you can smoke as many guys as you can, and now you obviously you grew over that time that you're in there, and you had this mindset of now like you realize that maybe that person that you thought you wanted to be or that you thought you were, um, is isn't there anymore. You know what I mean? Like it affected you. I feel like, which I mean, it's a good thing. You know what I mean? I think everyone's different, and the way you handle looking after yourself. Like you look for the resources. Obviously, we haven't talked about that yet in this podcast, but I mean, I know you personally, and obviously, you've looked for the resources to help you because you are here right now. And there's a lot of people can't say that because they weren't able to overcome that PTSD. Like it overcame them, and um, yeah, I mean, just congratulations. Like it seriously though, like it's you should pat yourself on the back every single day because I couldn't imagine that. And there's a lot of people, they're not here because they were overcome by that as well.
Right. Well, what I had realized in that moment, when those feelings were coming up, that I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go back to it,
Yeah.
was that I was like, the reason why that I think felt like was an attractive option for me in that moment was because it was easier than dealing with what I had been dealing with, and I think I realized in that moment that it takes way more strength and courage to address feelings, to have feelings, and to be vulnerable. And that was kind of like an epiphany like moment for me, and I began to really focus on how to increase vulnerability for myself, and incorporate that more so into my life. And to this day, I really believe that choosing to be vulnerable is probably one of the most healing things that somebody can do. That deep level of connection with yourself and somebody else, trusting, that much of yourself to other people without being afraid. I think is it's really important if you want to have high quality familial friend, intimate relationships with people. You got to select for that vulnerability. So
No, 100%. It's also just being honest with yourself as well. I feel like, but so it's been 20 years now since the anniversary that we discussed in the podcast, since the very beginning of the Iraq War. So what were you doing like the morning of 9/11 when the Twin Towers were being attacked on the news? Do you remember that?
yeah, I do. So I was in my sophomore year of high school that year, and I think we were sitting in our homeroom, between third and fourth period or whatever of school, and the teacher turned the TV on, and there's smoke billowing out of the tower, and like everybody else, just like sort of in shock, disbelief. And I knew, I knew at that time that, my plan was to go into the military. And I think I probably realized that, this meant that I was going to be more likely to be in combat. I think, though, being a couple years out from graduating, I was more worried that I was going to miss out. I was like, man, I hope it's still going on when I get in,
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
it lasted so long. That's the crazy thing, like people that probably joined 10 years later from that on, were able to see combat. So it's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah, it's wild.
What's even more wild is, how does it make you feel like knowing that kids are literally learning about this war that you fought in, like when you were in school, and obviously you were in combat during the Iraq War, but like, what do you think about that? Like, kids are learning about this Iraq War that happened. Like, what's your opinion on that take?
I mean, like I said, it makes me feel a little bit old, I guess. I mean, I got out of the military in 2012, went in 2004. So, even just thinking about the fact that I've been out of the military now for 11 years is, pretty wild, because even though it was that long ago, the last time I was in Iraq was we came back in 2008. So, which is like, what, 15 years ago? Um, even though it was that long ago, it still feels like yesterday. I still remember, I don't know, almost everything, I guess. All the men that I worked with, and, experiences that we had together.
Yeah, I know you touched base on it a little bit already, but what was like your last deployment like, um, in Iraq?
Um, well, it was like I said, it was in the Musaib, Escandaria area, and I had never heard of those places until I was going there. They called it. They referred to this area as the Sunni Death Triangle, and it was about a 30 to 40 minute helicopter ride south of Baghdad on the Euphrates. The FOB, the forward operating base that we worked out of, was basically just a giant power plant with a wall around it, and the snipers and the scouts were actually we had our own little living area on the opposite corner of the fob from the whole rest of the battalion, and we were the only ones that were living in like a actual hard stand building. Actually, I take that back, the mortars were directly across the street and had their own building too. But right directly in front of the house that we were staying in, which had a courtyard and a yard, the river was there, and there was a boat launch there. We used to climb up on the roof and tan and try to hit golf balls over the Euphrates, and like I said, it was pretty violent when we first got there. So when we first got there, the area north of the base was pretty heavily defended by um, the enemy, and it was sort of our main mission when we got there to do route clearance and establish some patrol bases north of the fob, and kind of run the enemy out of the area. It was around the same time also that they had initiated the what they called Sons of Iraq program, which really we all hated it. Basically created a situation to where military age males were supposed to be manning checkpoints along the route to deter IED emplacement as long as they're wearing a PT belt or a road guard vest or something to indicate to us that that's what they were doing, because all of these men were armed. So, now we're driving around in our area of operation and there's dudes walking around with AKs. Sometimes they wore a PT belt, sometimes they didn't, and so trying to determine who our enemy was became that much more difficult. And, of course, as you can imagine, a lot of those guys were, you know, not not our friends. Even though they were getting some form of payment every month for being willing to stand there, I, I'm certain that a lot of them were corrupt and not helping us, if you will. So it was kind of a weird situation. But from as a sniper, we spent a lot of our time, just being sort of the eyes and ears of the commanders in their respective areas of operation. And um, about, I don't know, 3/4 of the way through that deployment, one of the infantry companies had sustained some losses and really needed some leadership. And at that point in the deployment, I don't really know that anybody wanted us shooting anyone, anyways. Just from a sort of hearts and minds perspective, just sort of maintaining peace. So myself and a couple other sniper guys ended up going to Alpha Company and helping them out. And it was when I was with them where I was involved in a convoy where the vehicle in front of me was blown up and we lost some men. So
Do you think that played like the largest role in like like your the PTSD that you sustained and just like the mental injuries that you sustained, I guess, like throughout like your own life?
I don't know. It's hard to say. That night we had an informant with us, and he was supposed to be taking us to a cache site. None of us felt good about it. It was we were taking routes that were pretty sketchy. It was at night, and when it happened, I mean, it happened directly in front of me. I sort of broke protocol because, we train. If a vehicle in front of you gets blown up, in most cases you back up. If your vehicle is still, working, you back up, get out of the kill zone, if you will, and don't, immediately run up there because there could be somebody watching that could initiate a secondary blast, kill you as well. I pretty much did not care about that. I immediately ran to the blast site and wanted to, you know, make sure those guys were okay. And, coming around the side of the vehicle and seeing, it was awful. Just seeing, your friends in pieces, hanging out of the vehicle, like, it was very shocking. um, but I remember setting my rifle down, taking my helmet off, and just taking this like real deep breath and exhale as like got rid of feeling anything in that moment. I just stuffed it so that way I could climb into that vehicle, pull out survivors that were in the back of the MRAP, and the vehicle's on fire. There's battery acid burning and stuff, and you know I ended up like coughing up blood, but I didn't even notice, just because of the intensity of it. And we did. The driver was crammed underneath the steering wheel, and we felt like there was no way that he was alive. But we tugged on his gear until we were able to get him out of there, and he was alive. So we immediately started working on him, and it was just it was pretty awful. But I don't know that I could say that that one experience is what really did me in. Just I think just being in constant danger for that long. Um, I don't know. When you're driving down the road and every rock or every piece of trash looks like it's something that's going to kill you. I think
Yeah,
the accumulation of that over time, um,
just plays a toll.
yeah, absolutely.
Were you injured yourself though from that experience? Like any, or have you ever experienced like any actual physical injuries during your deployments too?
Mm-mm. No,
No.
I was pretty lucky.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, our sniper teams never got compromised. At least the ones that I was running. Um, I cared more about getting my men home alive and myself home alive than I did anything else. So I did my best as a 21, 22-year old to
Yeah.
make sound combat
Wild,
decisions.
honestly.
Yeah, to make sound decisions that would not end up getting us killed. So.
Would you
Uh,
say that like you like grew up faster than you like you think you would have if because of the military? I'm sure that's probably like a yes, but I'm just curious to see your take on it.
uh, that's actually a good question. I would say yes and no. Yes, in terms of, I was a 21-year-old planning sniper missions. That's that seems ridiculous. I'm 37 now. It's like, who the fuck lets a
Yeah.
21-year-old plan sniper missions?
Well, I'm sure you went back to school and like yeah, Bowling Green. You see all these dipshits like just partying their asses off, and like you know when you were in their like the footsteps, you know what I mean? Like you were like you said you were planning sniper missions while they're just playing beer pong with their frat brothers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, whenever I'd see ROTC cadets at at school, I would always be like, "Hey, man, don't let them take you alive," and yeah, so in that respect, sure, I did grow up a lot, hard and fast, learning about leadership and really just overcoming mental limitations. Sometimes that's a daily interface. When you're on a tough run or rock or literally anything you're doing in the military, you're pushing yourself past that comfort zone where you hear that bitch sound in your head telling you can't do anymore, but you just keep going anyways. So I'm grateful for that. But on the other side of it, um, a lot of people joke around that the military is like your mom and dad. you know, you're sort of shielded from, what everyone else is going through as they leave high school, where you don't have that mom and dad, military like accountability. And it's up to you to have your own personal accountability and self discipline to achieve all the things that you want to. I don't know that without the military, as a 18, 19-year old, that I would have had the self discipline that I would have needed to get through college, for example. Um, I was young and liked to party with my friends and, um, So I think in that respect, there's part of me that maybe didn't grow up in that way, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. Um, and we touched about this a little bit earlier, but like, what was your first aha moment like in your life that you can remember where you learned like a valuable lesson about like what it really means to be resilient? Because obviously, this whole podcast, it's about overcoming traumas and being your best version of yourself, really. So, like, what was that aha moment that you realized like your own definition of what resiliency like really is?
It's hard to say what the first one was. I feel like I've had several, um, all coming from different aspects. But I think, when I was really struggling in college with depression, PTSD symptoms, um, like I said, I was studying, molecular biology and stuff and very fascinated with that. But at the time, I didn't really care that much about human biology. I was more fascinated with, mycology and solving problems of invasive species or, things of agriculture, I guess. And it wasn't until, I started having all this stuff going on with me where I really wanted to use the skill sets that I was developing to figure out how to fix myself. I got started really getting into nutrition, mostly from like a cognition enhancing sort of perspective, like trying to figure out how I could make my brain work better and faster. And sometime in there, I discovered Mark Hyman's book, The Ultra Mind Solution, which was my first exposure ever to functional medicine. And after reading that book, it made me realize that my health is completely in my control. And, I don't have to rely on somebody else to do it for me. Actually, I can't rely on somebody else to do it for me. If I do, I'll end up with disease before anybody helps me out. So that was an important distinction for me, and it was very empowering to, continue to investigate. Well, how do you fix yourself? How do you discover the root cause of disease? And a lot of that's through food. You really fix your biology, fix your gut, reduce the inflammation in your body, and subsequently your mind by not eating like a dipshit. And so I think that was really like the first sort of aha for me. It was like, okay, there, this is something that I have control over and I can do. Um, did I immediately do it? No. Maybe bits and pieces of it. I worked at a nutrition store and could tell you something about all 9,000 products that were in that store. But, I was still really struggling with my depression and wasn't yet ready to take charge of my health in a way that would create the transformation that I really needed.
So would you say like you like kind of like studying these different fields kind of like helped and like kind of like led to you learning how to heal from war essentially?
Yeah, absolutely. Once I discovered functional medicine, I was like,
Yeah, that's
man,
what I was gonna say. Functional medicine is probably the best way to
yeah,
best way
yeah.
to
When I
describe.
discovered that, I was like, man, this is amazing. Like I said before, like when I was in the military, I became super fascinated with permaculture, regenerative, organic agriculture practices because I understood how the agricultural practice would impact your health. And so I was kind of already sort of on the leaning towards the hippie spectrum. I think that kind of happens to a lot of guys where they go from, you know, wanting to shoot people in the face to, you know what, maybe I should chill out a little bit and eat a little LSD and eat more vegetables. um, so, you know, I developed this skill of being able to uh, understand, you know, fairly complicated science journal articles, and it turned into a hobby for me. Really, you know, just investigating what PTSD really is, you know, from a neuroscience perspective. Um, you know, understanding inflammation in the body, how to treat it, um, and you know, I've just kind of been obsessed with it ever since. You know, I've been following Dr. Mark Hyman's work, still do. I was actually listening to his podcast earlier today. Um, Mark Hyman's kind of my spirit animal. Love that dude. It's funny too because he's also very much into regenerative agriculture. You know, um, I think he views regenerative agriculture as sort of the answer to all the downstream effects of chronic inflammatory disease in our country. So, yeah, I mean, I've been completely fascinated with understanding how to fix PTSD with myself. Very passionate to share all that information with other people. I have, you know, so that's pretty much been my main focus. I'm actually planning on finally going back to school, finishing that degree in biology, and applying to med school. So hopefully that all works out and pick up, you know, on that journey of my education.
Yeah, no, definitely.
To help more people, you know.
Yeah, no, 100%. I was gonna ask you too. Like, I mean, obviously you've come a long way since when you first got out and you were really struggling, and you've obviously learned to manage it. But do you still struggle with anything today, like to this day, right now?
You know, I'm pretty solid now, but I will tell you that, you know, I've kind of developed this opinion about mental health as, you know, something else you can add to the list of chronic inflammatory disease states. You know, if some people, if they, you know, eat terrible, you know, drink too much, you know, maybe they develop arthritis or psoriasis, you know, or diabetes, obesity, you know, all those kinds of cardiovascular disease. And, you know, all that stuff is real for pretty much anyone. But for myself, the first thing that I notice is all of these, you know, the symptoms of depression and anxiety become much more prevalent for me. They're louder. You know, my resiliency, my mental stress resilience declines, and you know, I've gone, you know, done really well with my health, you know, to where I'm fasting regularly, eating very clean, exercising, and then I've fallen off the health wagon, you know, gotten out of a habit, especially when I, you know, like periods of my life where, like, when I started my business, you know, I'm out building gardens every day and self-employed, you know, got into a habit of, you know, going out, eating out at restaurants, drinking with friends, you know, and as you know, Chris, running a business is difficult and it can be incredibly stressful. So, you know, there was moments during that time period where, you know, it was like I had done nothing, you know, and it's funny because I had been going through something pretty difficult for a while, and decided that I'd had enough, and really took a huge step in fixing myself. And I lost a whole bunch of weight. I was very lean. I felt great. And once, after doing that for several months, I finally was at this point to where I'm like, I'm going to start a business. And I did. And I was doing great with it. And then, this was in 2019, so it wasn't too long after that where COVID came in, and, quarantine happened and all that. But so my point is, I did the work. I was doing yoga regularly, meditating regularly, eating very clean. And when I got to that point where my health was awesome, at that point, I'm like, okay, now I'm ready to start a business. And I think that happens for a lot of people where, when you address your lifestyle habits that are hurting you and you fix all that, then you start new businesses, you enter into better relationships or end ones that are terrible. All kinds of good things happen as a symptom of taking care of yourself. And I experienced that, and probably took it for granted. I remember thinking like, oh, I'll never be fat again, because being thin was effortless, with doing the fasting. I'm like, there's no way, I'm ever going to put weight back on. Because I never became obese or anything, but
you became comfortable is probably what happened.
Yeah, and then with my lifestyle, not being what it should be, all the inflammation came back in, and with all the extra stress of being a business owner, found myself back to where I was before, fighting off those feelings of depression, anxiety, um, you know, intrusive suicidal thoughts sometimes, So, fortunately, I'm back to, taking very good care of myself. And
Yeah, now we get to actually help other people take good care of themselves too. I think that's
yes,
the
absolutely.
biggest thing out of this.
But I think it was a good lesson for me to learn, to see that, you know, that's a requirement. That's part of being resilient, is you have to take care of yourself. And it's really the easiest part of it, because you have control over it. There's not this like weird thing that's happening that you don't have control over. You do. And once you do take control, make the decision, the choice to take care of yourself like that you should, then everything else becomes a little bit easier. Now granted, if I'm driving down the interstate and there's an extremely loud noise that happens, I'm probably going to freak out a little bit. you know, I haven't necessarily figured out how to fix all that yet, but I don't wake up feeling like off myself anymore. Um, I love getting out of bed, and I have a lot more energy to do the things that I want to, and that's what's really most important, is just to be happy. So
You can't perform at those high levels if you're not happy. It's like impossible. It really is.
absolutely.
I'm sure people have asked you this before, but like looking back, like what is your, I guess like what is your opinion on the Iraq War? Like now that it's been so long.
Really, I've reflected about it a lot. It's funny to me, sort of, that some of the most challenging things that I've ever experienced and had to overcome, where I've lost friends, personally suffered for years because of it, or for something that I don't even really believe in anymore. We went to Iraq on some false pretense that there was weapons of mass destruction. That was, I think, more relevant before I got there. And I mean, really, even while I was in, all I really cared about, like I said, was getting my men home safe and get myself home safe. I didn't. I was never, one to be like a hardcore believer in what we were doing there. I guess, um, but I wasn't necessarily bothered by it. You know, I liked the job. I like the professional aspect of what it actually takes to make those kinds of shots. I mean, honestly, that was my initial, interest in the sniper community was the increased level of professionalism that was required to do that job well. Um, and now, it's just kind of sad, I guess, thinking that so many men lost their lives. Uh, you know, so many more men have lost their lives since leaving there. You that's awful. The amount of resources that are spent or wasted, if you will, on ineffective treatment for this PTSD, TBI. Uh, I've I've lost friends to suicide since being out. I've seen other men really struggle. Guys that were heroes, like that have done 15, 16 combat deployments, saved so many other men's lives on those deployments, get injured, get out, and crumble. They get divorced, get addicted to pain medication, drink too much. Now they're homeless and trying to kill themselves. It's really sad that that can happen to guys that were highly revered and respected in the military that had outstanding careers. Get out of the military and end up homeless or taking their own life. It's pretty awful. So that's why I'm I'm not really going to ever give up on figuring out the best way that I can communicate all these types of things to other veterans or literally anyone. It could be police officers, firefighters, people that work in healthcare. I know, my wife, she was a nurse or nurse manager during COVID, and told me about what that was like. And
Jeez. Yeah.
sheesh, people dying constantly, understaffed, overworked for an extremely long period of time. Um, that can be incredibly stressful and traumatic, so it doesn't matter necessarily what the source of trauma. Everybody will experience trauma in their life. That's just, it's part of it. But I think very few people have somebody necessarily connect all these dots to, so that way it becomes common knowledge to where everybody understands, like, okay, if I experience something traumatic or stressful, here's what I need to do to overcome that adversity, so that way it doesn't result in long form disorder like PTSD, um,
Yeah, and from your whole experience in the military, not just the Iraq War and your two tours there, but your whole experience in the military, what would you say is the most important thing that you learned from that experience?
um, overcoming mental limitations, honestly. Um, just, like I said earlier, just putting in those reps, uh, day in and day out, like ignoring that quit sound in your head and, it's translatable into literally every aspect of your life. I remember being in college. Like, I was never some smart kid in high school. I didn't give a fuck. Like, I took a freshman science class my senior year. you I had 3 study halls. Like, I did not care. And pretty much my entire life leading up to that point felt like I was an average student, or average person in terms of intelligence goes. And and then so when I started college, I approached it with the same mindset that I had developed in the military, which is extreme personal accountability, and not letting anything, no matter how difficult it seems, prevent me from being able to pursue it. Being non-deterministic, if you will, about my ability to literally do anything. And so as I did that in college, very quickly, people were recognizing me as being really smart. And I'm like, it's pretty relative. I just fucking try harder than you guys do. you know, but I mean, it's true. Literally anything. If you just keep going and don't quit, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, I say it all the time. You can't quit unless you fail. You can't fail unless you quit. The
Right.
opposite way around. But regardless, it's true. I mean, it's literally impossible to fail unless you throw the towel in, because you just keep going. It's the same thing with the business. You know what I mean? Like, you just keep building and measuring and learning what you're doing, and it's you just keep going. You keep moving forward in a straight line. You're going to eventually become successful.
I say it to our 5-year-old all the time. It may seem difficult at first, but everything seems difficult at first.
I like that.
Yeah.
Um, what are the 2 most important things that you've learned about being like resilient, not just in the military, but like in your life as well?
I think giving yourself the resources that are required to function optimally,
Yeah.
if start there. A lot of guys, and no discredit to them, but they start struggling with mental health problems or health problems. I mean, if your health is fucked up, that's your number one problem in life. If you wake up every day and you hurt, um, whether that be mental or physical, like, that's your number one problem. Let alone, trying to tackle something like starting a business, or achieving some kind of lofty goal in your career, or having a successful, happy relationship. So I think, really giving yourself the resources that you need, or optimizing those biological resources, so that way, when you do encounter something stressful, that everything is fully online to be able to address that. Number 2 would be, mindset, probably.
You literally read my mind. I was going to say mindset.
I mean, you can look at, any situation, from different perspectives. I know when I was in the throes of, awful depression, there could be, something happen, say, I get some large unexpected bill and I don't have any money to pay for it, right? In the inflamed, depressed state, that's a crisis. It's awful. It would completely, crush you. But when you're crushing the gym and your nutrition, and those types of situations occur, and you have a growth mindset, then, you know, when that kind of stuff happens in you, it just looks like another problem to solve. You know, you become more solutions oriented versus victimized by those types of situations.
Yeah, it's just an obstacle to overcome. That's literally what it is, I feel like. Is there anything else that you would like to share with listeners about your experience that may be helpful for, like, you know, anyone that's still struggling to gain a foothold in their life, whether it's from the military or, you know, whatever traumas that they've experienced that are causing them to, you know, feel the way they do?
Yeah, I mean, I gave you two things that I feel like were really important. I think I would say a third would be, you know, having a good support network, you know,
Yep.
or at least taking advantage of it. You know, if you're struggling, regardless of what it is, you know, realize that you're not alone in feeling that way. You know, so many people, and probably almost everyone at one point in their life are feeling the exact same way that you do, you know, or similar to it. And for some reason, we all develop this perception that we're a bother. You know, we feel very isolated or lonely when we're depressed. And, you know, we don't want to be perceived as weak. But I'll tell you firsthand, from my experience and from a lot of other men that have been through similar, if not worse, experiences as I have, that just talking about what you're going through to someone, you know, being vulnerable and sharing that is probably one of the most powerful things that you can do.
It's a strength. That's literally what it is. It's a superpower because it helps you overcome that feeling that you actually are weak, you know? And I feel like people that are able to, you know, that share that vulnerability, like, they're the ones that are strong, not the opposite around, which is, you know, what kind of society and like a lot of men like perceive it as. But you know, as your example in the green zone from that first video on the YouTube channel, um, you know, the first suggestion, you know, that the mental health professional talked to you guys about was literally talking about what you're going through. And I feel like that's the biggest thing with the support system, because, you know, that's what it's there for. It's your support system is there so you can talk to them and be able to let them know, like, you know, whatever you're going through, and they're there to help you out in the long run. And without that system, it's going to be hard to, you know, maintain those resources and that strong mindset. But you don't need it. You can still have that strong mindset with the resources around you that you have at your fingertips. But the support system is definitely there to help. That's my take on it.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, this is the first episode of The Art of Resilience by Extreme Resilience. A lot more stories like this coming in the future. You know, we want people to come and listen to, you know, high performers and, you know, how they got to where they're at right now, the struggles that they're going through, and the resources that they use to be able to, you know, battle their struggles and also maintain that high performance in their own lives. But thanks for listening in. And as we go through these new episodes and, you know, time goes on, we're going to be finding our voices a lot more. I'm sure there's a lot of mistakes that are probably in this, but, you know, it's just part of the game, and it's part of, like, you know, really finding our voices for this podcast, really. But Jim's story was amazing, and you're gonna hear more and more about his, you know, his experiences through his life, and our experiences as well, and, you know, our takes and our advice. But we're really doing this to be able to give everyone the right resources so they can have, you know, that extreme resilient mindset in their lives as well. But thanks for listening in again, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. We really hope you liked this episode. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps, and we appreciate it immensely. And one last thing, guys, please share this video to everyone you think it may help. It allows our content to reach those that may need it most. But all right, see you next time. Peace.